It's June the 10th, 2021, and our reading today from 1 Samuel is chapter 26. The Ziphites went to Saul at Gibeah and said, "Is not David hiding on the hills of Hachilah, which faces Jeshimon?" So Saul went down to the desert of Ziph with his 3,000 chosen men of Israel to search there for David. Saul made his camp beside the road on the hill of Hachilah, facing Jeshimon, but David stayed in the desert. When he saw that Saul had followed him there, he sent out scouts and learned that Saul had definitely arrived. Then David set out and went to the place where Saul had camped. He saw where Saul and Abner, son of Ner, the commander of the army, had lain down. Saul was lying inside the camp with the army encamped around him. David then asked Ahimelech the Hittite and Abishai, son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, "Who will go down into the camp with me to Saul?" "I'll go with you," said Abishai. So David and Abishai went to the army by night. There was Saul lying asleep inside the camp with his spear stuck in the ground near his head. Abner and the soldiers were lying round him. Abishai said to David, "Today God has given your enemy into your hands. Now let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of my spear. I won't strike him twice." But David said to Abishai, "Don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless?" "As surely as the Lord lives," he said, "the Lord himself will strike him. Either his time will come and he will die, or he will go into battle and perish. But the Lord forbid that I should lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. Now get the spear and water jug that are near his head, and let's go." So David took the spear and water jug near Saul's head, and they left. No one saw or knew about it, nor did anyone wake up. They were all sleeping because the Lord had put them into a deep sleep. Then David crossed over to the other side and stood on top of the hill some distance away. There was a wide space between them. He called out to the army and to Abner, son of Ner, "Aren't you going to answer me, Abner?" Abner replied, "Who are you who calls to the king?" David said, "You're a man, aren't you? And who is like you in Israel? Why didn't you guard your lord the king? Someone came to destroy your lord the king. What you have done is not good. Surely as the Lord lives, you and your men deserve to die because you did not guard your master, the Lord's anointed. Look around you. Where are the king's spear and water jug that were near his head?" Saul recognized David's voice and said, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" David replied, "Yes, it is, my lord, the king." And he added, "Why is my lord pursuing his servant? What have I done, and what wrong am I guilty of? Now let my lord the king listen to his servant's words. If the Lord has incited you against me, then may he accept an offering. If, however, men have done it, may they be cursed before the Lord. They have now driven me from my share in the Lord's inheritance and have said, 'Go serve other gods.' Now do not let my blood fall to the ground far from the presence of the Lord. The king of Israel has come out to look for a flea, as one hunts a partridge in the mountains." Then Saul said, "I have sinned. Come back, David, my son, because you considered my life precious today. I will not try to harm you again. Surely I have acted like a fool, and I have erred greatly." "Here is the king's spear," David answered. "Let one of your young men come over and get it. The Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and faithfulness. The Lord gave you into my hands today, but I would not lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. As surely as I valued your life today, so may the Lord value my life and deliver me from all trouble." Then Saul said to David, "May you be blessed, my son David. You will do great things and surely triumph." So David went on his way, and Saul returned home. Amen. Well, this group called the Ziphites, who have shown themselves to be pretty slimy and treacherous in the past, they pop up again. doing exactly the same thing again in verses 1 to 4, enabling Saul in his attempt to hunt down David as if he's pursuing some kind of wild animal to his death. Then verses 5 to 12, David and Abishai do this very daring thing, similar to what we've seen before. They go into Saul's camp while Saul and his men are sleeping. This is obviously an echo of chapter 24. It's a replay, but in a perhaps even a more daring way than what we saw there. And again, displaying David's exemplary attitude towards authority, towards the government of God, towards the Lord's anointed. So we get to verse 11, but the Lord forbid. Abishai is trying to encourage him. In fact, he said, I'll do it. I'll take my spear and I'll kill him. But David will have none of that. But the Lord forbid that I should lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. Exactly like happened in chapter 24. And again, similarly, a similar thing happens. Now get the spear and water jug that are near his head and let's go. That happened before. And again, for a reason, for a purpose, as we'll see. Verses 13 to 16. Again, almost exactly the same as before. A wonderfully dramatic reveal. David calls out now to Abner, Saul's commander. Verse 14. And he accuses him. He says, your job was to guard, to take care of the king, your master, and his life has been threatened. His life was at risk. What does he say? Verse 16. What you have done is not good. As surely as the Lord lives, you and your men deserve to die, because you did not guard your master, the Lord's anointed. Look around you, and here's the drama of it. Where are the king's spear and water jug that were near his head? So that's how close David got to Saul. And he accuses Abner and his troops of a terrible failure in their duty to protect and preserve the king. 17 verses 17 to 25, presumably Saul wakes up at this encounter. David is at some distance, but he's shouting down into the camp, and he recognized David's voice. And again, his response, much the same as before. He gets very emotional. Once David has revealed himself, he again pleads his cause, his innocence. Verse 18, Saul gets very emotional. Verse 21, I've sinned, he says. I've acted like a fool. That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? That sounds pretty impressive. And he even seems to have a spirit of reconciliation. Come back, David, my son. He seems to be melted by another act of mercy from David. And then the chapter ends with some great truths being declared about God's character. The Lord, verse 23, who is faithful, who rewards righteousness. And David's destiny is affirmed, even by Saul. He understands this now. Then Saul said to David, may you be blessed, my son David. You will do great things and surely triumph. There are many lessons to be learnt from this incident. The one I want to emphasize, as we did before, is found in a verse like Romans 13 and verse 1. Everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities, But there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist. Even Saul. And one day David, but today it's Saul. The authorities that exist have been established by God.